When playing Skyrim, I'm the kind of guy who would roleplay a lot, with a lot of different playstyles and characters, using various mods to make everything all the more immersive. One of my favorites was an elf alchemist with summoning rods who loved reading, and so I made it a mission to find every book in all of Skyrim. And there are a lot of them. Books about history, stories, journals, spellbooks, etc. But one of the most famous books in all of the Elder Scrolls is The Lusty Argonian Maid. Only famous because it's the only bit of erotica found in the game. Well, unless you add mods for that, but yeah. It's a story about a maid and her master, and she's lusty. You know, typical erotica stuff. But the thing is, she's an Argonian. You know, the lizard people. And speaking of female lizard people, and their lust, why do they even have breasts? If you haven't gathered already, this video will talk about boobs. Yes, boobs! Real mature subject, I know, but this is a legitimate question asked by quite a few people all around the internet, including me. It is a genuine query, you see. The thing is, breasts are basically exclusive to humans, unless you count cows and goats with their udders. Breasts are made of fat and mammary glands, the mammary glands being the part that produces milk to feed the babies. And some adults, if you're into that. Hey, it's less weird than drinking dirty, pussy bovine juice that isn't even meant for humans. Anyway, all mammals have mammary glands. That's why they are called mammals. They have mammaries. The vast majority of mammals only have swollen mammaries when they get pregnant and have to feed their offspring. When the offspring get older and stop drinking milk, the mother's mammaries will shrink back down to normal. Humans, goats, and cows are some of the few exceptions to this. But this is the whole thing. Mammaries belong to mammals exclusively. There are no known exceptions to this, like how platypuses and echidnas lay eggs instead of give live birth despite being mammals. Or like how some sharks and snakes give live birth instead of laying eggs. No, mammary glands are, by definition, exclusive to mammals. And a mammal must have mammary glands to be considered one. But Argonians are lizards, reptilian people, reptiles. They are covered in scales, have spikes that go along their back, along with horns. They lack outward ears, and they have spiky teeth, all that jazz. There are no breasts at all to be found on lizards. Realistically, they should be flatter than a cutting board. Or should they? Is there perhaps a scientific explanation for why female Argonians have these chest lumps? First, let's look at a few possibilities and figure out the likelihood of each. One of the unique abilities that Argonians have is the ability to breathe underwater, but looking at them, they have no visual gills. And for anything as big as an Argonian to be able to breathe underwater, you would need some pretty huge gills. So perhaps all the Argonians are really doing is holding their breath in the same way that many other reptiles do. For instance, crocodiles usually hold their breath for 15 minutes, but can easily do so for 2 hours, and in extreme conditions, can survive only breathing every 8 hours. And from a game design aspect, it makes more sense just to say that they can breathe underwater than it does to program in an 8-hour breath meter. Anyway, so when an Argonian needs to, they fill these bladders, which are right in front of their lungs, with air, so that they can hold their breath for a very extended amount of time. But then again, why would only the female ones have these air bladders? Well, it may not only be the female ones, all of them do, but that doesn't mean they need to have them extended all the time. They can choose to have them full or empty whenever. But for the sake of existing in a society consisting almost entirely of mammals, the female Argonians keep them filled to give themselves a more feminine look. This makes things a bit easier for their mammalian counterparts to be able to tell the sex of an Argonian by looking at it. This way, they wouldn't perhaps assume an Argonian is male and begin talking to it and be taken aback in surprise when a female voice comes forth. It's only a minor inconvenience, yes, but the way you portray yourself subconsciously affects everyone around you. First impressions are everything, and they are made within 5 seconds of seeing someone. So this difference can do a lot. But I put this as possibility number 1 because I think it's also one of the most unlikely. You don't see male Argonians underwater suddenly grow 2 bumps on their chest. And also, they may not even need air bladders to hold their breath for so long, or even gills to breathe underwater. Scientists studying sea turtles recently found out that they are in fact able to breathe underwater, but not in the way we traditionally think of breathing. They don't do it through lungs or gills. They have swollen glands around their tongues and around their anuses. These glands are able to absorb oxygen right from out of the water. They are not as efficient as their lungs are, of course, but they allow the turtle to breathe underwater for up to 4 months. So gills and air bladders aren't needed. Argonians may have oxygen-sucking oral and anal glands. So I'd say this theory, while a good theory, is debunked. So what is the one thing that basically females of all species have that males don't? Eggs. Females have eggs. Even mammals have egg cells inside the ovaries. Males all have sperm, which combines with the eggs to fertilize them and produce offspring. Some animals, like fish, will lay eggs and then the male fish ejaculates all over them. This is why the ocean is salty. Others, like birds and reptiles, will mate in the traditional way, and the sperm fertilizes the egg cells inside the female, which will then develop inside until either the eggs are laid in a nest or a baby is fully developed from the egg inside and birthed out alive. Various animals have various means of storing their eggs once laid. Most commonly, it's a nest of sorts, but some go a step further. For instance, seahorses. Once the female has her eggs fertilized and they have developed a short bit, she transfers the eggs into the male for safekeeping until they hatch, in a little pouch that males have. Some spiders will put their eggs into a sack and never let go of them for months until they hatch. There is also the common Suriname toad, most famous for storing her eggs inside of her back until they hatch. Then little baby frogs come out in one of nature's most disturbing displays. And that's just when fertilized. Females also always have organs for storing non-fertilized eggs as well. So animals of all kinds have tons of different ways of carrying their eggs. Argonians may be a species that has a unique means of doing so as well. Sacs on the chest of the female. So groping an Argonian would be more like squishing a scaly beanbag chair than a fatty water balloon. This theory would explain why only the females have the sacs, but if anything, I think it creates more questions than answers. The breasts are far away from the reproductive organs, or at least where we can assume the reproductive organs are. The sperm would have to travel a massive distance to reach the eggs. Normally sperm only have to travel about 4 inches, and that often takes more than a day to do. So imagine having to travel a few feet. Sperm only have a lifespan of 72 hours, so 3 days. So unless Argonians have the fastest sperm in existence, there's no way they would be able to reproduce this way. Unless the breasts are perhaps only where the already fertilized eggs travel. But that would mean that every female Argonian in Tamriel is pregnant all the time, though they are a more animalistic race, and reproducing may be super important to them. So, maybe? So, the egg sac theory. It's a theory. I'd say it's not the case, but it is a good guess. Now that sounds strange, doesn't it? But this is similar to what I mentioned in the first theory. The existence of lumps on the chests of females helps differentiate them from males, which, if anything, is more beneficial to the other races around them than themselves. I'm sure Argonians can tell all their sexes apart just fine. Anyway, biologically, in this theory, the breasts serve no additional purpose to them. They are just lumps of stored fat, perhaps similar to a camel's. But it would make sense that they would be this way when considering the violent evolution possibly involved. Even in modern Tamriel, Argonians are a lowly race, and primarily slaves. So could you imagine what life was like for them before they were finally accepted into just being slaves? Initially, the other races may have just seen them as bipedal animals, and killed for sport, or at least were never shown any mercy when raided or mugged, since it's not like you're killing anyone important or super sentient or anything. But over the eons, the survivors happened to be the ones that did look more human, more anthropomorphic, and mainly more human female, due to the old "don't harm the women and children" sense of morality. So the ones with larger fat deposits on their chests would live to produce more offspring, and sure enough, they would adapt, and the larger chests on the females became the norm. They look more human, and thus are treated a bit more like them. It's all psychological. There have been tons of studies about how breast size can change people's perception of you, for both the better and the worse. Some studies have found that staring at breasts can increase a man's lifespan by 5 years, and others have found that some men see women with larger breasts as stronger. More, you go girl femme power, while others see well-endowed women as needing more protection, not necessarily because they are weak, but because they would make better reproductive partners. They have good genes, so they should be saved and protected. These attributes were all especially true in the olden days of yore, the medieval ages, of which most fantasy games are based on. So it's all subconscious, and this subconscious advantage could make all the difference for this lowly race of slaves. Argonians, being reptilian in nature, would most likely lay eggs, but Mark Nelson, a game designer and writer for the Elder Scrolls, was asked about whether or not Argonians lay eggs, and this was his reply. Men and mer assume much about Argonians, but who among them has ventured deep into Black Marsh and lived to tell about it? They assume that Argonians lay eggs because they resemble the tree-dwelling lizards that scurry about on 4 legs. Yet they assume Argonians have live births, because the females have breasts with which they might suckle their young. Perhaps it is both, as necessity demands. I wouldn't expect to hear an Argonian born in Skyrim, or Solstheim for that matter, mention being hatched. Nor would I expect to hear more transient Argonians, say members of a small nomadic tribe, speak about laying eggs. However, in warmer climates, in places with established, stable, and permanent communities, you would likely see a great number of eggs. This implies directly that Argonians can choose to lay eggs or give live birth, which isn't anything new. Fruit flies, aphids, and the yellow-bellied three-toed skink. It sounds like a cowboy insult. So, hence all this, right? It's a cowboy insult. Laugh. Among others, can choose to lay eggs or give birth depending on the circumstances. So if Argonians are able to choose to give live birth, that's just one extra check mark on the possibly is a mammal checklist. And even with eggs, remember, the platypus and echidna, both mammals, both lay eggs too. So what is another reptile versus mammal thing? Cold-blooded versus warm-blooded. These Argonians are surviving in the northern parts of Skyrim just fine, so you could easily claim that they must be warm-blooded, at least to some degree. Perhaps not as warm as humans, but warm enough. But they are still covered in scales, so they have to be reptiles, right? Again, not necessarily. Introducing the pangolin. This little guy is a mammal completely covered by thick, sharp, overlapping scales it uses for defense against predators. And it's a mammal. There's also dragons, and while they are mythical in our world, they do exist within Tamriel, so dragons are fake isn't an argument against this point. But, while not the most modern interpretation of dragons, some ancient versions of the mythological dragon are mammalian, and give birth to live dragons. Some even have fur, and are more beastly than lizardly, and yet will still have scales in amongst the fur. So taking all this into consideration, as well as Argonians are a fantasy race, so really they can be whatever the creators want, you could say that Argonians are indeed more mammalian than we assume, and the breasts on the females are indeed used for giving milk to their offspring. But then there is the issue of how baby Argonians actually use them. Lizards don't have lips or jaws, at least not in the same way that we do. So baby Argonians would have a really hard time creating suction since their mouths are so wide and long. Plus, could you imagine what the poor mother would go through when the baby starts teething? Ugh! Argonian teeth are like knives! Plus, this also begs the question of whether or not Argonians have nipples. Skyrim, being Skyrim, has a massive modding community, and various nude mods have given Argonians nipples, but most don't, because of the whole they are reptiles and nipples can't exist on them thing. But considering how rough and scaly Argonian skin is, a soft teat to suck on wouldn't really fit. Unless, of course, female Argonians are more like how this mod portrays them, and they have soft spots around the area, where nipples would be. It's possible, but so is them not having nipples at all. Bringing up the platypus again, they have mammary glands and give milk to their young, but they have no nipples at all. Instead, the milk just secretes itself out of their normal day-to-day pores on its skin, right by its underarm. My goodness. Platypuses just really are the bottom of the barrel. Just leftover parts. So the same could be said for Argonians. Rather than a soft nipple that the baby is incapable of sucking on in the first place, a spot where milk comes out between the scales makes more sense, and the baby just laps it up with its tongue. So far, this seems to be the best theory, but I've yet to bring up some of the deepest bit of lore. And for theory number 5, we'll put elements from all of the previous possibilities and make one big solid theory, taking this big chunk of lore into consideration. The Elder Scrolls is a huge series, and I don't just mean in popularity. I mean, their games are all huge worlds with characters, with backstories, and the amount of lore is massive. There are so many books to read, people to talk to, histories to learn. It's awesome, but sometimes there is so much that to some it seems like so little. For instance, more people have played Skyrim than any of the others, possibly combined, likely because it's easier to get into, and it had a very successful marketing campaign. But unless you go back to some of the previous games as well as read the actual physical books, there will be a ton of lore you have no idea about. And that's what I'm about to talk about. Some hidden lore that may just explain why Argonian females have breasts. Now, in-game, this is considered to be a legend, but all legends have some truth to them, and considering the Daedra, dragons, and the Divines all exist in this world, and they're also legendary, it wouldn't be a stretch to at least say that this legend is also true. And to a large extent it is. So Argonians believe their souls were given to them by the Hist, and according to them, there was nothing before the Hist. This would also explain why Argonian souls are indeed different from the souls of everything else. Yeah, in case you didn't know that. So, what are the Hist? They are a species of giant spore trees deep within Black Marsh, the province the Argonians are from. Argonians have a deep connection with the Hist, and feel that everything they know is thanks to it. The further away they are from a Hist tree, the less of a connection they feel. And they will soon begin to lose their ability to understand gestures and speech. This, of course, causes Argonians to have a very close bond with the Hist, and so they call themselves People of the Root. Argonians also claim that these trees are sentient, all-knowing beings that created not all life in Tamriel, but a large chunk of it, such as all life in Black Marsh. Because of this connection, they often lay their eggs directly underneath Hist trees, especially the Great Hist Tree, where most Argonians in Black Marsh are born. Going on a bit of a tangent now to talk more about the Hist, there's a floating island called Umbriel, which is said to float because the Hist trees which reside on it will it to be so. There is also the Realm of the Hist, which is a mysterious realm of oblivion. As legend says, this realm of oblivion was mostly destroyed, and a small corner of the realm manifested itself into Tamriel and became Black Marsh. And speaking of this, the sleeping tree in Skyrim is possibly a baby Hist tree. Legends say that when the Red Mountain erupted in Morrowind, it blasted a rock clear to Skyrim, and from the rock came the sleeping tree, with its magical mist and magical healing sap. Though, other legends say that it fell from the sky from a floating island, likely referencing Umbriel. Hist sap is said to not only heal those who drink it, but it also increases the overall combat ability of those who do. But with the side effect of sending the drinker into a raging bloodlust. You know, just your normal everyday stuff. However, when Argonians drink it, it is said they receive hallucinations and communicate with the Hist trees, and this sap also has the ability to alter many living organisms, especially Argonians. In fact, Argonian hatchlings lip up the sap in large quantities before being weaned off of it. But it is said that when Argonians begin to exit their juvenile stage of life, they will begin licking up more sap, which sprouts from them the appropriate organs for non-Argonians to more easily tell the sex of the Argonian. So it is possible that Argonian breasts truly are just for show. After all, everything is better with boobs. Explorers have found cave drawings that depict an Argonian-like race, but they appear to be more tree-like. This, including everything else we've talked about, leads me to this conclusion. These sentient trees, the Hist, created the Argonians, initially as physical manifestations of themselves, perhaps to protect their stationary tree bodies that lack protection. Initially, Argonians were tree-like, but over the eons they've been modifying their look with the use of the magic sap and the Argonians' natural ability to adapt. Over the eons, the sap makes them significantly more humanoid, so that they, and the other races, may better understand one another, see eye to eye, and avoid confusion. Or even just for the Argonians' protection, as other races begin showing them more mercy as they begin to look less and less like animals. So as far as putting the pieces of lore together goes, I think that this is very true. But does that mean that Argonian breasts are in fact useless? Not necessarily. Now we are once again entering the realm of theory. Being as adaptable as Argonians are, able to breathe underwater or just hold their breath forever, being able to be a reptile at their base but also have feathers, warm blood, and being able to choose between giving live birth or laying eggs, you could say that some additional adaptation was given to the females by the Hist to better raise their young while away. Yes! Mammary glands, though not necessarily mammary glands. Perhaps, rather than giving off milk, Argonian females may be able to store or even produce small amounts of Hist sap in case they give birth while too far from a Hist tree. While of course later on she'll need to bring her young to a tree, having this ability would certainly be beneficial, since naturally Argonians all drink a large amount of sap at hatching, and they could still secrete this nutritious sap-like milkish substance without being considered mammalian. As it turns out, pigeons give milk to their young as well. Well, not milk exactly, but the same idea. They have glands deep in their throat that secrete a milk-like nutritious thick liquid that mixes with the food they regurgitate to their hatchlings. So, creating nutrients for your young isn't exclusively a mammalian thing. Only milk is. So it's very possible that the Hist gave female Argonians breasts that can secrete a sort of Hist sap substitute for their young, that comes out through small pores in between their scales and then drips down. The babies can then lick it up the way lizards do. No impossible suction maneuver necessary. But that's just another possibility. Now you know a bunch of possible reasons why Argonians have breasts, some more possible than others. This was definitely one of gaming's most important of questions, and I was honestly not expecting it to take this long. Jeez! But I hope I've entertained you. And now you can share this video with other fans who pondered the same thing. And here's another great question. Why don't the Khajiit have 6 breasts? Cats have 4 to 8 nipples. Well, I answer that question right here. And until next time, you stay awesome and never stop using that noggin.